When my daughter was about 2 years old, I walked into the living room one quiet afternoon and stopped in my tracks. She was standing in the middle of the carpet, spinning two cardboard paper towel tubes tied together with twine in the air like little flails. The scene was strange, not just because of the contraption she was swinging around, but because of how focused and precise she looked doing it. Her tiny face was set with such serious concentration, her eyes narrowed just slightly as she spun the tubes in a rhythmic pattern. I watched for a moment before curiosity got the better of me. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" I asked. She stopped and looked up at me with an expression that said the answer should have been obvious. "I'm practicing my nunchucks," she replied, matter-of-factly, as if she had just said she was coloring or playing dress-up. I blinked, stunned. "Your what?" "My nunchucks," she repeated, slowly, like I hadn't heard her properly. Then she held them up proudly to show me the homemade weapon she had crafted with her toddler hands. "Adam told me how to make them. He shows me how to use them every night." I stared at her. My heart was starting to race a little, but I didn't want to show it. She was only 2. How could she possibly know what nunchucks were? I'd never mentioned them. Her father hadn't. We didn't own any martial arts movies, and she certainly wasn't watching anything beyond cartoons about talking animals. So I crouched down and asked her gently, "Who's Adam?" She beamed. "Adam is my friend. He comes to my room when the lights are off and everybody's sleeping. He told me I have to practice every day so I'll be ready. He said one day I might need to protect myself." Her voice was so casual, so light, like she was talking about an imaginary friend teaching her to ride a bike. But I felt a cold chill climb the back of my neck. Something about the way she said it didn't feel pretend. I kept my voice calm. "What does Adam look like?" She paused, thinking for a moment, then nodded as if it was the easiest question in the world. "He's tall. He has yellow hair and blue eyes." I was frozen. Not because of the description, though that was eerie enough, but because of what she said next. "You know what he looks like, Mommy. You know him," she said, looking directly into my eyes. "He died of a headache." That's when I had to leave the room. I excused myself as calmly as I could, told her I'd be right back, and walked into the hallway. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my heart pounding. My hands were shaking. You see, just 4 months before she was born, my best friend, Adam, passed away. Adam had been like a brother to me. We'd met in college and quickly became close. He was tall, with thick blonde hair that always fell in his eyes, and bright blue eyes that sparkled when he laughed, which was often. He was gentle, goofy, and endlessly kind. A martial arts instructor in his spare time, he had this calm, patient way of teaching that made you feel safe, like you could take on the world. He was 27 when he died. A brain aneurysm. It came out of nowhere. One day he said he had a terrible headache, and within 24 hours, he was gone. It didn't seem real at the time. It still doesn't some days. I was devastated. We had made plans for him to be a part of my daughter's life. He had been so excited when I told him I was pregnant. He teased that he would teach her to kick before she could walk. And now here she was, standing in the middle of my living room, swinging makeshift nunchucks, telling me that Adam had been visiting her at night to teach her how to defend herself. She'd never met him. She wasn't even born when he died. There were no photos of him around the house. I hadn't talked about him in a long time, not out loud anyway. His death had left a hollow ache in my chest, and while I carried his memory with me, I rarely shared it, especially not with my toddler. I don't know how she knew what nunchucks were. I don't know how she knew his name or what he looked like or what had happened to him. And I don't know how she knew, in the simplest of terms, that he'd died of a headache. But she did. What rattled me even more was the confidence in her voice. There was no doubt, no hesitation. She spoke as though this had been part of her normal life, as though Adam coming to visit her was no more unusual than a dream or a bedtime story. I didn't ask her more that day. I was too shaken. And strangely, she never brought Adam up again. Not even once. I don't know if it was my reaction that made her stop, if I scared her with my sudden silence, or if she somehow sensed my discomfort. Or maybe, in her mind, the lessons were complete. Maybe Adam had finished what he came to do. But sometimes, late at night, I think about it. I think about my daughter, now older, and how she still seems to carry a quiet confidence, like she's already learned how to handle herself, how to be strong, how to stay calm under pressure. And I think of Adam. I think of how he promised he'd be there for her, even though he never got to meet her. I think maybe, in some way I don't understand, he kept that promise. I've never fully made sense of what happened. Maybe I never will. But I do know this. Some bonds are strong enough to cross even the greatest distances, even the ones between life and death. And sometimes when I see my daughter moving with grace and precision, I can almost picture him smiling in the shadows, nodding with approval, still watching, still protecting, still teaching. I was adopted at birth by the man I've always known as my father. He raised me and my brother after our mom, struggling with addiction, left when I was 10. My dad did the best he could with what he had. It wasn't always perfect, but it was enough, and I'll always be grateful for him. When I was 17, I found out through someone I barely knew, not a trusted family member, that the man who raised me wasn't my biological father. That revelation hit me hard. The person who told me claimed my biological father was actually my first cousin. At the time, he was dating one of my friends, which made everything even stranger. I didn't want to believe it. I brushed it off, said I didn't care, but the truth gnawed at me. Eventually, the pieces started clicking. I didn't look like my dad. I remembered my mom once saying, "You look just like your father," but it felt off, like she didn't mean the man who raised me. So, I reached out to my cousin and asked for proof. He invited me to his house and introduced me to his mother, my aunt by marriage. She sat me down gently and explained everything. She showed me pictures, and that's when I saw him, my biological father. I was stunned. I looked just like him. That moment was crushing, not because I was angry, but because it made everything real. Then, as we kept flipping through photos, I saw her. My hands went cold, and I dropped the entire stack. My aunt immediately asked what was wrong. Shaking, I held up one photo and asked, "Who is this woman?" She looked at me with kind eyes and said, "That's your grandmother. She passed in 1997. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the picture, heart pounding. You see, when I was 12, I had recurring dreams, vivid, peaceful dreams that spanned months. In them, I'd walk up a dirt path lined with sunflowers toward a double-wide trailer. Wind chimes swayed at the porch, and a beautiful woman with long, dark, wavy hair would greet me. She always smiled, always seemed so happy to see me. She'd offer me sweet tea or lemonade, and we'd sit on the porch in the sun, just talking or singing. I always felt at home with her, safe, loved. But I never knew who she was. The dreams faded with time. I forgot about them. Until that moment, holding that photo. That woman, my grandmother, was the same woman from my dreams. I was stunned. My aunt knew immediately. She said, "She came to you, didn't she?" I nodded, eyes full of tears. She then told me my grandmother had been highly intuitive, even psychic, and that most women on her side of the family had similar gifts. "Do you know what her favorite flowers were?" she asked with a small smile. "Of course, sunflowers. I used to work as a housekeeper at a hospital, and our department headquarters was located down in the basement. It was a typical hospital basement, concrete walls, long halls, quiet and dim. Most of the time it just felt like a space to pass through, but occasionally things felt a little off. At the time, the hospital was doing some remodeling. They were transforming an old, unused room down there into a break room specifically for the housekeeping team. It was a pretty spacious area, and the construction crew had been coming in and out for several days, working on the renovations. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual noise, mess, and heavy equipment lying around. One day after lunch, I was heading back down to the basement to sign in. It was quiet, no one around, which wasn't unusual for that time of day. As I was filling out the sheet at the sign-in station, something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. Just a flicker, like someone walking past or standing off to the side. I turned to look, fully expecting to see someone, maybe a coworker or one of the construction guys. But there was no one there. I paused, a little puzzled. It hadn't felt like a trick of the light. It felt like someone had been there. I glanced around, shrugged it off, and walked toward the room that was being turned into the break area. It had become a habit of mine to say, "Hello there," when walking into that space, whether people were there or not. Just a light-hearted thing, I guess. So I did it again, stepped into the room and said, "Hello there." No reply. The room was completely empty. It didn't seem strange at first, but something about the silence hit me a little differently this time. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel like you'd just missed someone by seconds. When I got back to my station, I casually asked if the construction crew had been around recently. That's when I found out. They hadn't been there at all that day. In fact, they weren't scheduled to come back until the following morning. I just stood there for a second, trying to process what I'd seen. It wasn't a full apparition or anything, just a shadowy figure in my peripheral vision. But it had felt like a person. There had been presence, movement, enough to make me turn my head. Strangely, I didn't feel scared, not even a little, just curious, maybe even calm. Whatever it was, it didn't feel threatening. It felt familiar in a weird way, like someone who'd passed through the space before and hadn't quite left. I never saw anything like it again, and I didn't talk about it much. But I always remembered that moment, that subtle sense of not being alone in a place that was supposed to be empty. Maybe some places hold on to energy. Maybe the hospital basement just has its own quiet watchers. Whatever it was, I'm certain of what I saw. And I still greet that room every time I pass by, just in case someone's still listening.
This might be a long one, and I've never shared it publicly before, but I swear it's 100% true. My dad can absolutely back me up. This all happened when I was about 10 years old. We lived in a house where the previous family had lost a young daughter to cancer. She passed away in a local hospital, not in the house, but we always knew about her. I lived in that house from age 3 to 18, and while most of it felt normal, the basement always gave me a weird feeling. Not terrifying, just off, unsettling. And I wasn't the only one who thought so. Our basement had a little makeshift basketball court, and I'd shoot hoops down there almost every night. We also had this big black stereo system I'd crank up for music while I played. Every single time I finished, I'd rush up the stairs like sprinting, without fail. And no matter how many times I told myself I was being silly, I'd never look into this one corner of the basement. I had this deep, irrational feeling that if I looked, I'd see someone standing there. I could feel it, like I was being watched. One night, I finished shooting hoops and went to bed. My dad and I laid down at the exact same time. He was in his room, I was in mine. A few minutes later, he knocked on my door and said, "You forgot to turn the stereo off." I told him I was sure I had, but he insisted. "It's absolutely blaring." He went downstairs, and sure enough, the stereo was blasting music, in the pitch black. I know I turned it off. But okay, maybe I bumped the remote. I tried to rationalize it. Then, about a week later, maybe even sooner, the weirdest thing happened. I had just finished another round of solo basketball in the basement and climbed into bed. A few minutes later, I started hearing this sound coming through the vent in the corner of my room. I leaned in to listen closer. It sounded like bouncing. I froze. It was my basketball. I was 100% sure. I could hear the distinct rhythm of it dribbling on the concrete basement floor. The vent was directly above the same corner I always avoided, the one I refused to look at. I panicked and ran into my dad's room. I told him to listen. He put his ear to the vent and he heard it too. Without saying much, he went downstairs. A minute later, he came back up. No sound, no ball, no movement, just still, heavy darkness in the basement. To this day, 20 years later, we still bring it up occasionally, kind of joking, kind of not. But it's one of those moments neither of us can forget. We never came up with a real explanation. Whatever it was, it made sure we remembered. Let me know if you'd like an atmospheric image to go with it. Something like an eerie basement corner or a lone basketball in the dark.
This happened to a close friend of mine. His wife is the outdoorsy type, loves hiking, camping, being surrounded by nature. My buddy? Not so much. He's more of an air conditioning and Wi-Fi kind of guy. But like most good husbands, he tries to meet her halfway. So when she suggests they spend a few days hiking in Joshua Tree National Park, he agrees, letting her handle all the planning. Since they have a baby, she books them a room at the Pioneer Town Motel, a rustic spot just outside the park with a bit of old Western charm. It's got history, character, and, as they'd later learn, something else. The trip goes fine, mostly. They spend their days hiking with the baby strapped to a chest carrier, exploring dusty trails and marveling at the strange, otherworldly desert landscape. But it's on their last night that things take a turn. They're all asleep in their motel room, baby in the middle, wife on one side, my friend on the other. Sometime during the night, the baby stirs and my friend wakes up. He cradles the baby until she dozes off again. But now, he's wide awake, lying in the dark, listening to the silence. Then something strange happens. Above the bed, there's an old antler-style light fixture with several bulbs on it. Without warning, it starts to glow. Not like a normal light being turned on. It comes to life slowly, glowing brighter and brighter until it's blindingly bright. Then, just as gradually, it fades back to complete darkness. He's instantly alert, spooked. Was it a power surge? A wiring issue? Maybe just an old building doing weird old building things. But before he can settle on a rational explanation, something else happens. At the foot of the bed, two pale blue balls of light suddenly appear, just hovering in midair. He stares at them, frozen. His first impulse is to jump up and flip on the lights, but he hesitates. Is he dreaming? Hallucinating? He doesn't want to startle his wife, or worse, wake the baby and have a crying infant on his hands. So he does what most people would do in a horror movie. He pulls the sheet over his head and pretends it's not there. But when he peeks, the lights are still visible through the sheet, blowing softly. That's when he feels the pressure. Starting at his feet, something begins to push down, like a board slowly being laid across his body, inch by inch, spreading up to his knees, his stomach, his chest. Not painful, but unnatural, oppressive. He holds still, eyes squeezed shut. Then he hears it. A faint hissing sound, like air escaping from a balloon. It's long, drawn out, and coming from somewhere in the room. The pressure continues as the sound does, and still, he does nothing. He lies there until dawn, silent and shaken. At first light, he gently wakes his wife and says they should get an early start back home. She doesn't question it, and they pack up and leave without incident. He never tells her what happened. Not then, not later. He didn't want to scare her, or worse, have her think he lost his mind. Months later, he tells me. We're sitting in his backyard, fire pit crackling between us, and the way he tells it, I know he's not making it up. This man isn't the type to embellish. I believe him, every word. Later that night, curiosity gets the best of me. I look up the Pioneer Town Motel. It turns out, decades ago, back when Hollywood actors stayed there while filming westerns in the desert, a woman took her own life in one of the rooms. Something about a broken engagement. People claim that room is haunted. Reviews online mention flickering lights, strange sounds, even floating orbs. I asked my friend if that was the same room he stayed in. He says he can't remember. But I think it was. And I think something there remembered him.